All right, so we are moving into chapter 6, and for this week's module, we're going to be focusing on existential therapy. And so I have attempted again to post some videos from Alexander Street, and hopefully they will work. I don't know what the issue is. Sometimes they don't even work for me, and I don't know why. So in my effort to save you all some money and force you to not force you to listen to Corey talk about Stan for 16 weeks, and not have to buy the DVD for the text, this is the issue I guess we have, is the technology isn't always working out as I would hope for us. But so please just continue to let me know if you can't view the videos, and hopefully I can get some better alternatives. What we're getting into now with existential therapy, and if you look at the beginning of the chapters of the text, it's going to kind of give you an overview of who the people were that came up with these theoretical approaches to counseling. And so we're getting into more recent times, and so what I'm able to find now, and you'll see this week in the module, I've got a video of Viktor Frankl and a video of Rollo May as well, because these people were alive in times of technology, and so we were able to capture them in the work that they do, and as a result, there's more YouTube videos versus other mediums for watching these people in action. So hopefully I will have some fallback videos for you that may be very old, works with these psychotherapists, but it hopefully would be a nice alternative if Alexander Street is not working. So I encourage you to watch the videos of May and Frankl. Viktor Frankl, I think if you understand the history of him as a person, if you understand what he went through, and that his entire family was wiped out in a concentration camp, essentially, and so he, his life experiences really were the foundation for this existential approach to therapy and psychoanalysis, which isn't like some of the other ones that we see, or most of the other theoretical approaches. There's not a set a guidebook. There's not a step-by-step process for what psychotherapy really should look like or needs to look like in existential therapy. There's not a set of techniques. It's more of a philosophical approach to counseling and psychotherapy. And really, I think even if you are not drawn to existential therapy, or that this is a theoretical orientation, and I think it can be a little bit difficult to capture change in the way that managed healthcare wants us to, if we're using existential therapy as our foundational approach to working with clients. But really, in the broader sense of this approach, and Frankl's idea that we are all striving to find meaning in our lives, that anxiety stems from certain areas, and we want to have freedom of choice and have a purpose, but it's anxiety provoking to think that that we may not have that, and so I think that a lot of the foundational ideas of existential therapy, you can actually see that in a number of the other theoretical approaches, but this approach just doesn't have the nice homework assignments that CBT has, right? But I encourage you to listen to Viktor Frankl speak about his approach and why he developed it. Again, you're thinking about where he came from and the type of suffering that he saw. It makes sense. It makes sense that this is kind of his mindset in a psychotherapeutic process. I absolutely love his concept, and to just conceptualize it as despair is suffering minus meaning. So without meaning. So if while all people experience suffering to some degree, some more so than others and in different ways, it's when we are finding difficulty in the meaning of that suffering. Why are we suffering? What's the purpose of this suffering? That's what can lead people to these increased states of despair. There are there's another video about existential therapy that I think is really interesting, a fun little guy that talks way quicker than I ever do, that I hope that you watch in addition to listening to me talk for a second. But so, some of the existential psychotherapy questions that that clients might be asking are the who, what, why, when, where type questions, right? Why am I here? What is my purpose? What gives me purpose and meaning in my life? What do I want ultimately from the time that I am living here on earth? And so the role of the therapist in this process is to walk alongside the individual to help find answers to those questions, to help the individual experience some change in their search for meanings, so that they can feel like they are more accepting of who they are, of their conditions of life, and have more awareness and self-control moving forward. The one that kind of, so I always think of existential therapy as kind of this scary spot for me, and there really is a good connection between the foundational aspects of existential therapy and disability, and understanding how a person's perceived quality of life can change at the onset of disability based on how they understand, based on their understanding of their purpose in life and their meaning, and acceptance of disability. So there's a lot of existential thought. It can be very philosophical when you're working with somebody with a disability who's saying, why did this happen to me? Why me? What does it mean for the rest of my life? What is my purpose now? And there can be such a shift for people that have disabilities that are later onset, and their understanding of what their new purpose might be. So if you have a chance to as well, I do encourage you to look at the Logotherapy Institute. Logotherapyinstitute.org is the website. And so the Viktor Frankl Institute of Logotherapy is still operational, still functioning and thriving. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about logotherapy and his approaches to psychotherapy in general, that's the best spot that I can direct you to. And I'm trying to think of what else is really important here. So again, when I'm thinking about existentialism and existential psychotherapy, it always draws me back to this show that I watch called Alone, okay? And if you watch it, fantastic. If not, I encourage you to, just to see what these people do. It's kind of like Naked and Afraid, but they're not naked, but they do tend to become afraid because they're alone in the wilderness. And so the show drops these people in the middle of nowhere, usually somewhere very cold, and says, survive. Do your best, survive. When you need to tap out, you tap out. And it starts out with 10 people. The grand prize is $500,000, and then they just have to survive on their own. They get 10 or 12 survival items of their choice, and a radio to call for help if they need it. But I always lock myself into, one person on that particular season that is doing really well, that's building their home from scratch with a sauna, and they've got their fire going, and they've killed a grizzly bear, and they've got all their food. And then all of a sudden at the end they say, yeah, I think I'm done. I think I've figured out why I came here. And it blows my mind, because I just want to, and I do sometimes yell at the TV, but you're going to get $500,000, just stay 5 more days. But when I think of existential therapy, that's really what I think of, and this is just my own way to conceptualize things. But a person living out there in the woods by themselves, trying to discover some new meaning in their life, trying to understand how they got to where they were, how influenced they have been from outside forces, to a degree, how much those outside forces matter and don't matter in their lives, and what they want to do with their lives in the future, the meaning and purpose behind why they're here on this planet, and why they're doing what they're doing. And so it's always the people on the show Alone, it's on the History Channel, that I think are going to make it to the end, because they're very grounded, and they know what they came there to do. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they say, I realized the meaning and my purpose of doing this. It's time for me to go home and see my family. But it's interesting to watch, because you can kind of see their levels of anxiety rise and fall throughout the process, and coming to terms with being alone out there in the wilderness. So, I don't know if that makes any connection for you guys or not, but that, I guess, in a nutshell, is existential therapy, right? If we don't have specific techniques to look at, then we're just kind of wondering, why is existential therapy the way it is? Anyway, so what I hope that you can do is look at the video that I posted of the session that goes on with Annie, I believe her name is, and within that, see how Dr. Schutz is working with Annie and his approaches, and how he, the facial expressions that he's making. I'm not trying to, spoil alert here for you all, but he really does appear to be walking alongside Annie in her understanding of what's going on in her life and the problems that she's posing to him in the counseling session, which, if you think about where existential therapy came from, growing out of the Freudian movement and traditional psychoanalysis, it's very different from that, because in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, the therapist is a blank slate. It's the therapist is sitting there, is allowing that person to have that time to do free association and access, their unconscious mind. And within existential counseling, and even more so existential humanistic counseling, which is the more modern approach to this theory, the therapist is right alongside the client, presenting these hypotheses, saying, what about this? I'm kind of thinking that maybe this. And so the counselor is much more present in that process with the individual, helping them to discover meaning. That's ultimately the goal within this therapeutic approach. So with that, I'll leave you guys to the other videos. I hope, again, you're able to access them. At the very least, the YouTube one should be working just fine for you.